Hey, I'm Bob with Laguna Tools. Around here they call me Router Bob. I think you're going to like this video, especially if you just recently purchased a Laguna Swift CNC or you're thinking about it. Because in this video we're going to start with it gets unloaded from a truck and we set everything up ready to make something. Okay, the process begins when the truck arrives with your machine. Now typically it's going to be curbside delivery. What that means is they unload the truck at the end of your driveway normally, so it's your responsibility to move it into your shop or your garage or wherever you're going to use it and unpack it. Now first off, the machine's going to be sitting on a pallet and it's going to have a lot of packing material on it. So the first thing you do is you inspect it to see if there's any physical damage that occurred during shipping. If there happens to be physical damage, be sure and note it on the paperwork that you sign with the trucker, and also take photographs and report that to Laguna Tools within 24 hours. As you unpack the machine, be sure and look for what we call hidden damage inside. Some damage that happened in shipping that wasn't visible from the outside. If that's the case, once again, take photographs, contact Laguna Tools within 24 hours. Okay, now what we've done with this machine is we've put it in position, we've taken it off the pallet, we've taken all the wrappings off. The only thing we've really done is we've taken our control cabinet and set it here on the floor so it's a little more convenient. Okay, this is a test sample that was actually run on this machine before shipping. And what we'll do is, the last thing we'll do in this process is we'll actually cut that and make sure everything's right on the machine. Okay, let's take this last piece of packing material off. Wow, that table looks great. This bucket is actually used to hold water. We have a pump that we use and that's for the liquid cooled spindle. So we'll set that lid aside. Let's see what's inside here. Well, there's a dust shroud. So that's a nice dust shroud. Okay, here are a set of wrenches, and these are spindle wrenches so that you can put tools in the machine. We'll set those out here. All right, here's some paperwork. Here's a manual. Here's some Laguna information. Looks like that's the paperwork from your order. And now here's an interesting package. What these are actually to be used with T-slot attachments. We'll look at those a little bit later. Let's see what's in this box. Looks like we've got some tools. It looks like there's some router bits, some spare fuses. Here's a collet nut and some collets. We'll look at those later. Down here in the bottom, this is the machine control. That's the HHC. Looks like we've got, that's a puck for touching tools off, so that's good. Looks like we have a cord to attach our handheld control to a computer if we wanted to, and some extra drive belts, and here is also, looks like we have a memory stick. Okay, this box contains the pump that's used to pump water for the liquid cooled spindle. We'll unpack that once we get ready to hook that system up. Alright, let's take this pair of side cutter pliers and let's get rid of all the zip ties that are used for bundling wires and tubes. Clip that, and we'll get that clipped. Okay, and same thing here. I'll reach in if I cut the... Alright. Okay, we're looking good there. And then finally, alright, so there we got that. Okay. This is the Laguna HHC. Let's plug it in. Just a simple plug on the bottom. You screw the two screws in. Alright, that's good and tight. That's good and tight. Alright, and then we'll put it on this little holder temporarily. That's a place to keep it while we're setting the machine up. Okay, now let's wire the machine in. Now, if you're uncomfortable with wiring, just hire a licensed electrician and they'll be able to do that without any problems. Now, what I did was I ran my wire, and by the way, the power's off at the panel. I ran my wire through that opening and then into the cabinet. And in order to open the cabinet, you'll have to turn the main switch to the off position, pull that handle and rotate it, and that cabinet opens up. All you have to do to wire this up is connect the wires to the main cutoff switch here. Okay, now let's go through the procedure of starting the machine up. The first thing I'm going to do is turn the main power switch on down here. And you'll hear the fans turn on. You'll see a red light come on. you'll see the VFD display light up. Okay? Then I'm going to make sure the E-stop is not depressed. If you turn it clockwise, it releases in case it is. Okay, then we want to turn the power onto the controller, so we turn that key and we hit the on button, and that turns everything on. Now this button actually turns the water pump on, so that's power to the water pump, and we'll look at that a little bit later. Okay, we've got one more thing to add to the machine, and that's this little touch-off puck, and it actually plugs into a socket here on the front of the machine. And we'll tighten it, and it goes right in there. Okay. Okay, this machine has 3 axes, X, Y, and Z. X is across here, Y is back here, Z is up and down. The first thing we do is home the machine, and home is determined by mechanical sensors. So the machine goes in each axis till it locates those sensors. From that point on, the machine control knows where it is. So you have to home the machine first. So that's what we're going to do in this next step. Once we start the machine, we're going to home it first and make sure there's nothing on the table that could actually be hit. Right? Then I come over to the control, and if you notice on the screen, it says all axis home. When I press the green button, which is OK, it's going to home the machine. I'm ready to home the machine, so I'm going to press the green button, and let's see what happens. If you watch the homing procedure, what you saw was the Z-axis come up first until it detected that sensor in Z. Then you saw the X-axis move over to detect its sensor. Then you saw the Y-axis detect its sensor. Now, if for some reason one of those, for instance, if you heard it hit a metal, hit the frame or something, then that would mean that one of the sensors is not aligned correctly. And sometimes that happens in shipping. The little flags can come loose. So the first time you home it, be very careful and make sure that you see it. When you home it, you'll see it. It'll actually move up and back up a little bit. Then you know that's right. Also, there are lights on those sensors. So if you have an axis that you don't think is homing right, watch the homing light. Okay, I'll put some water in the bucket. Let's get our pump out. Let's see what's in this box. There it is. Now, by the way, these are 220 volt pumps. And we have a connector on here that just screws on. Sometimes those are laying in the box. That's an adapter, and that goes on here. And then our tubing fits into this. And then we have a cord, and we have a plug. So that's a 220 volt plug. So that looks pretty good. All right. Now let's connect all this stuff. I'm going to put this down in the water first, and then we're going to connect the hoses. Doesn't matter which hose you hook onto the pump. And then we'll power it up and we'll see if we get water coming out. It's really, really important that this pump work, because what happens is this keeps the motor cool. And as long as you're running this pump, you can run really, really long 3D programs and the spindle doesn't get hot. So it's going to last a lot longer. Okay, I'm going to feed these tubes through the lid, and then one of them, and it doesn't matter which one, fits into this. All right. Now we'll set this pump down into the water. And then this little slot right here is for the cord. And before we do anything, let's make sure this is working. Let's turn the pump on and make sure we get water. Okay, if you notice there's a plug that's coming out of the control cabinet, let's plug that in. Okay, now let's turn the water on. So that's what this switch does, and if everything works, you'll see that green light come on. And let's see if it's working. Yep, okay. Okay, first you'll see all the air come out of the lines. So the pump's running, so we know that's working. Now the air bubbles have quit coming out, so it's purged the air. Now you'll see the liquid coming out. It's really important that this work, because this is what makes your spindle last a long, long time. So periodically check that. Also check the water, and if it gets nasty inside, clean it. Now that we know the pump's working, then we'll put the lid on, and really that lid just keeps trash out of the water. So now we've got that part of the system set up. All right, these machines have centralized oiling, and so what you do is you press that handle about twice, and that sends lubricant all the way out to all the bearing trucks. Now, about twice a day, you can over lubricate it. If the rails feel oily, you're okay. If they feel dry, it's probably time to lubricate. If you run low on it, its 30-weight non-detergent motor oil will work fine. Let's turn the power on to the control, and let's watch the screen load. So now you see the controller loading itself, and the first thing it's going to do is it's going to ask you, do you want to home it? And so now I'm going to press the green button. Now if you notice on these buttons, a lot of them have more than one function. So the green one's okay, but it's also origin. We'll talk about origin later. So right now I say okay, and the machine homes itself. Now we know where it's at, and so the spindle is roughly in the lower left-hand corner of the machine towards the front. Okay, now let's move it around. So, all right, x-axis goes from left to right, so there's x positive, x negative. All right, let's press this button, and there it goes across an x positive, and you'll notice the coordinate changing. Okay, if I press this one, it goes the other direction. So x positive, x negative. All right, same thing in y. Y positive goes from the front to the back of the machine. Y negative comes back to the front. And when it's home, Z's all the way up, so we really have to go down and Z first. So Z goes down, and Z comes back up. Now sometimes you want to move the machine slower, and if you look at this button that says high, low, and zero, when you press that, watch that screen, you'll see it switch to L. That's low. Now when I jog the machine around, it's much slower. So if I want to move it just a little bit, set it on the low. If I switch it back to the high, then it's faster. Now let's talk about a little bit more about this jogging the machine around. When you first turn the control on, at the bottom it says continue. That means continuous. And what that means is when I press one of those buttons, the machine just keeps moving as long as I hold it down. Now you'll notice when if I momentarily press it, it just steps over a little bit, okay? Now if I press this mode button, you'll see it starts displaying step. So step means it's going to move a certain amount every time. So when I hit step and I hit, for instance, X minus, it moves a certain amount. Now you say, well, how much is that? Well, it's real easy. If you have the high-low button set to high, it moves a 1/2 millimeter. So every time I hit that button, by the way, 1/2 millimeter is roughly 20 thousandths. Every time I hit that button, the machine moves about 20 thousandths. If I depress the high-low button and the screen shows low, it's a 1/10 of a millimeter. So every time I move the machine, it moves it an exact amount, a 1/10 of a millimeter, which is 4 thousandths. Now that's fine, except sometimes that's not precise enough. So if you go to the next mode, it comes up and it says a distance. And so let's say I plug in 0.0254 because this machine's metric. I hit OK. And it'll show around. Now that's 1,000th of an inch. 0.0254 is 1,000th of an inch. All right. Now every time I touch it, it moves the machine 1,000th of an inch. And we'll use that later when we touch off a tool, because now I can move 1,000th at a time. Okay, now we have a pretty good understanding of what home is. Home is a mechanically determined position that's determined by sensors. Now let's look back over at the control, and you notice in front of X, Y, and Z, there's always a number or a letter. Right now it says 1. Now, let's press the menu and 0 button, and now it says AX, AY, AZ, and those are the machine coordinates. So when I home it, they should all be 0, because at the home position, the machine coordinates are always 0. All right, that's fine, but now, how do we locate things on the table? Those are done with origins. Okay, let's unpack this concept of origin a little bit more. It's also a work coordinate. It's called a 0-point offset. You'll hear the terms G54, G55. That's all describing the same thing. For us, what an origin is where we want the corner of the drawing to be. So if you're using VCarve Pro and you've got X0, Y0 at the corner, that's what we're going to say on the machine where that's located. That's what this origin does. And here's what I do first. I decide, okay, what origin am I going to use? I have 9. I could actually save 9 separate ones. I typically use the first one. So the first thing I'm going to do is on the controller is press menu 1. So I press menu 1 and release, and you'll see it switches over to 1 X, 1, Y, 1, Z. If I did menu 2 and released it, it'd be 2X, so that's a second. So there's 9 of those. Let's go back to 1, menu 1. Now, we'll jog the machine over. So we'll say we'll go over here, and we'll go over here. And we'll say that position on the table is where I want the origin to be. So to set that, I come up to button number 4, which is X, Y, it's got a little 0, and I press that. Now if you notice, X and Y are at 0. So if I jog the machine somewhere else, we'll move it in Y. Okay, now if I tell it to go to home, it homes. But now we've identified another place called an origin, so then we have the ability to tell it to go to the origin. And that's how you validate, all right? So it's at home. I'm going to press the OK button. If you notice it has an OK and it has an origin, I press that, it goes to the origin that I just set. So that's how you validate where you set that. So what I'm doing now is I'm positioning where X0, Y0 is on the machine table. That's the connection between the machine location and the software. Okay, now we've got the machine motion all worked out. Now let's talk about cutting and routing. This is the spindle. This is a 3 horsepower liquid cooled. All right. Now we can actually loosen these bolts and slide it up and down. Sometimes you have to do that for a special setup. Right. Now the tip of the spindle has a taper, and a collet fits inside of there. This is an ER20 collet. An ER20 is a standard. So pretty much anybody you buy an ER20 collet from is going to fit. All right, now, and of course you have different sizes based on what shaft size for the router bit is. All right, so this happens to be a 1/4 inch. Now let's talk about how far you put the bit in there. Let me get that in there. A router bit typically has a flute. All right, you don't want the flute to go past the face of the collet. So, and I try to keep it not more than 1/16 of an inch. So that's really important that you set it like that. Okay, then the collet actually snaps into the collet nut, and you'll hear a little spring pop in there. And if you've got it snapped in, it's roughly flush here. It won't be perfect, but it'll be roughly. So it's retained. If you don't do that, the bit may not clamp in correctly. Just remember your collet nut is right-handed threads, just standard threads. So I'm going to tighten that till that snugs up. That's pressing that collet in. Okay, then I'm going to take these 2 wrenches. One of the wrenches actually fits onto there's some flats on the spindle, and the other wrench fits a collet nut, and you tighten it. All right, now the tool's correctly installed. Our next concept is called tool touch-off. Now, we already know how we set the origin to match our drawing. Okay, the other variable is the tool. Where is the tool in space and Z? We've placed the tool into the spindle. We've got it locked in. Now we have to adjust the tool to something. In this case, I'm going to touch the tool off to this surface. So what I'm going to do is get down there really close. I'm going to use a piece of paper as a feeler gauge, and I'm going to move it till I just feel it. To do a manual tool touch off, the first thing I'm going to do is jog the tool down fairly close to the surface. Right. Then we'll probably slow down. Remember, the high-low button determines how fast you go. When I get it fairly close to the surface, then I take my piece of paper or other feeler gauge. Then I switch this mode to step. Remember, step, if we use the high-low button, if it's set on high, then every time I move that in Z, it moves at about 20 thousandths. Okay, if I have that set to low, the L, every time I move it, it's about 4 thousandths. And I get close to the feeler gauge at that point, but that's not close enough to actually set the tool. So then I switch mode again, and I put in there 0.0254, accept that, and it rounds it to that. Now every time I move that, it moves at 1/1000th of an inch. Now I get the feeler gauge out, I bring it down to where it's just touching. Okay, that paper is 4 thousandths thick, so I pull that out, and now every time I move this, it's 1,000. So 1, 2, 3, 4. Now the tool is at the same level as the surface. So then to remember that, or register it, that I press button number 8, which it says on the Z set 0, and I press that, and now that tool is touched off to that surface. That's the connection between the machine and the drawing itself, or how you position the tool within the material. Okay, now that we've done a manual touch off of the tool and we know how to do that, let's do an automatic touch off, and that's what this puck's for. It's a metal metal puck. Now, what you want to do first is let's make sure that, especially the first time you set the machine up, that the electrical connection is correct. You turn on tool touch off by pressing the menu button first, hold it down, then press the on off button and release them both, and you'll notice the spindle will start going down in Z. Alright, before you put a tool under there or anything or touch it, just touch that and make sure it retracts. That ensures that the electrical connection is correct. Now let's actually apply this. First off, let's jog this down closer. Okay, we start it down, put our puck underneath. That's a whole lot easier than my piece of paper. Let me show you a little tip here with this tool touch off. If I press the menu key and I go down here to machine setup and hit that, and I move down through the list, and you'll find a setting that says CAD thickness, and we'll select that. Alright, so it says 11 millimeters. Now what that represents is the thickness of the puck. So the thickness of the puck is accounted for when you do the automatic tool touch off. Well, let's say you need to cut a little deeper, a little shallower. You can change that number by pressing that and entering the other number, hit OK, and now when you touch the tool off, it'll make that minor adjustment. So that's a real easy way to make very minute adjustments to the tool depth. Okay, let's talk about the spindle to start with. Now, you can turn it off real easy on the handheld control. You press the on-off button once and it turns the spindle on, and you press it again and it turns it off. So that's real simple, and it's always good to test that. Now, how do you control spindle RPM? That's done with the VFD. Now, what you'll see here, you'll see a number displayed. In this case, it says 300. If you multiply that number times 60, that tells you the RPMs, because we're using 60 cycle current. So 300 is 18,000 RPMs. Now, if I turn the spindle on, I can actually adjust the speed back and forth. So I've got really precise control of spindle RPM, and it's controlled here, not within the program itself. Our final step in our setup system is to actually cut the demonstration program that came with the machine. So what I've done here is I've taken a piece of 2 foot by 2 foot metal. I mean, you could actually use the test panel the other side if you wanted. Now I'm using these T-slot clamps. Anytime you use T-slot clamps, be sure you don't run into them with the router head. Okay, now to locate it, I happen to know that that program is located on center. So I just drew diagonals and located the center. Then I jogged the machine over and set that as the origin. And if I press the origin button, it'll go there. And we've loaded the program and we're ready to cut. You know, I think I'll leave off this dust collector shroud so you can really see what happens in the cutting process. It'll make a little dust, but it won't be too bad. So now let's load our program, and here's how you do that. First off, let's make sure we're at 1X, 1Y, 1Z. I'm going to press the Run, Pause, Delete button, and it's going to bring this screen up. Okay, U-Disk is a USB, so the USB would plug in there. In our case, this program is on the internal memory, so I move down to here, I'll hit OK. The name of the program is IQ Test, and I hit the OK button again. And now this screen comes up. Okay, I hit it again, and the spindle turns on. Now it's counting down. That's to give it time to get up to speed. And now it's going to start cutting. Well, it looks pretty good. Let's take this off and let's take a closer look at it. We'll get this off. You know, it really wasn't that messy. Let's get some of this dust out so we can see what happened. How about that? I hope you enjoyed the video. This is one of my favorite models, the Swift series. Now, what we showed you here applies also to the different sizes, the 4x8s and any custom sizes. Now, if you have any questions, call Laguna Tools at 1-800-234-1976, or you can see us on the internet at www.lagunatools.com. Thank you for watching.